Chapter 14. An Education Fit for an Executive. Per my usual routine, I arrived at work early the next morning. Dealing with traffic in Los Angeles is possibly one of the most daunting crucibles a person ever has to endure in life. I wanted to avoid the perennial traffic jam on the 405 freeway. The 405 can be pretty unforgiving during rush hour. I hit the lobby around 7 a.m. and was greeted by a new face.
"Hi, Mike. Mark Alias. Nice to meet you."
Mark was one of the least imposing people I had ever met. He stood about 4 foot and 12 inches and couldn't weigh more than 125 pounds, and that is with his three-piece suit on. "Mark, oh yeah, I got your email the other day by mistake."
"Yeah, well, I'll be working with you this morning and getting you up to speed on the finance side of the house."
"Sounds fun. Kind of like seeing how the hamburger is made, right?"
"It's a little less bloody than that, Mike, but yeah, basically. Let's walk and talk. You can walk and chew bubble gum, right?"
"Sounds good to me."
"Mike, if you were to guess, how many insurance policies do you think go unclaimed each year? What do you think, if you were to estimate it?"
"I have no clue. How many?"
"Guess. I've seen your pedigree. You've got enough industry experience to make an educated guess."
"Mark, honestly, I have no idea."
"More or less than 10%? Over or under? What's your bet?"
"It's got to be under 10%. I don't know, maybe 1% of claims? Who doesn't collect on their life insurance? Why would you pay all those years and not collect?"
"Believe it or not, the answer is 5%. Across the entire life insurance industry, on average, it's about 5% of death benefits go unclaimed. That's how many people never collect a death benefit."
"No, 5%? Really? 1 out of 20? I was shocked. I mean, that seemed absurd to me that so many people would pay for a policy and never collect the thing they paid for."
"Let's walk and talk. Here's the thing about finance. It's not an exact science how we price insurance policies. When done correctly, think about it more like an art form."
"Got it. Art, not science."
"Yes, well, we have to ride the line between the two. Ultimately, what we want to do is blur the lines a bit."
"Blur the lines? How so?"
"Good question, Mike. Let's say 5% of policies go uncollected on average. What we want to do is simply push that line a little bit further out than the average. Push the goalpost."
"What do you mean? I don't follow."
"The thing is, Mike, people don't care about their insurance policies. People care about the type of phone they buy, the car they drive, and the house they live in. Insurance is a nuisance as far as most people are concerned."
I nodded for Mark to continue his rant. Mark was right. Insurance is right up there with getting a root canal to most people.
To get to that magical 5% average, some companies are above the 5% and some are below the 5%. Ultimately, the customer will never know the difference. We want to be the kind of company that is above the 5%.
"So what are you saying exactly? You're saying—"
"I'm saying we want to be above the 5% average, that's all. When we're above 5%, we're able to provide significantly greater returns on economic capital, which means greater returns to our shareholders. We are a bottom-line company."
"Okay, so how do we do that?"
"How? However we can, Mike. However we can."
"Uh-huh.
That is, of course, without going to jail or getting the attention of the regulators."
"Of course."
That's really where the art form comes into play. We want to blur the lines, bend them, without breaking them.
Mm-hmm.
Let me ask you another one. What percentage of term insurance policies pay out?
I was afraid of where this conversation would lead, so I stalled for a moment to think. I have no idea. You stumped me. How many?" The truth was that I wanted to have no idea. It was starting to seem that ignorance was bliss.
"Less than 1% of all term life insurance policies ever pay out. That's across the whole industry. By and large, most people, 99% that is, outlive their term insurance. In fact, almost all people who buy term insurance never die during the term. Let me guess, we want to be above 1%, right? Oh, look at this guy. You're a quick study, Mike. I don't care what anybody else says about you. In my book, you're all right. That wasn't the first time someone told me that around here. I guess I had gotten somewhat of a colorful reputation on the sales floor. Throwing a man's sandwich across an office probably didn't help instill a lot of goodwill in the Flushy community. The thing is, Mike, the longer we can stretch out paying a claim, the longer we can keep investing that money and in return earning investment income on that money. We want to delay claim payments as long as we can, within the bounds of the law, of course. In other words, blur the line. Uh-huh. Look, you're the shiny new object around here. We need to align on something, and we need to align on it fast. And that is what exactly? Ask for forgiveness and not permission. What? Have you heard of the first mover advantage? I read about it in the packet. That's about the extent of it. It's simply being the first to go to market with something, the advantage of doing something first, before anyone else. Well, that is Flushy doing it first. If you see a way to capitalize on something and increase the intrinsic value of the firm, do it. What are the bounds of the laws? I mean, there has to be strict laws around that, right? Oh, I didn't realize you went to law school. Where did you get your law degree from? I didn't. Oh, then let the lawyers be lawyers, and how about you do your job? Sorry, what I meant was, aren't there regulations or laws that we have to be mindful of? Sort of. It's kind of a gray area. It's not really that black and white. Let's leave all that legal stuff to the lawyers. What do you say? Yeah, that makes sense. Look, your job is to recruit as many insurance agents as humanly possible, and do that as quickly as possible. You say jump and I say how high, right? Good answer. I like your style, Mike. In a nutshell, here is our roadmap to success. We're going to start purchasing insurance companies. We're going to start by purchasing insurance agencies. Think of it like a reverse merger. We stopped abruptly in the hallway. Mark was deep in thought. He looked at me and said, "You familiar with Olympic rowing, the sport of rowing? Do you know the strategy behind being the fastest boat?" I'm more of a baseball kind of guy, to be honest, but I'd imagine they win by rowing faster than the other boats. Ha! That's priceless. The team that wins does so by rowing together as a team and following the direction of the captain. It's important that we all row together as a team. Can you do that, Mike? Can you row together? Yeah, I can do that. Mike, I need to make sure we're aligned on this. Perfectly. As aligned gets. Without notice, we started walking again. Mark had this grimace look across his face. The guy was stone cold. I mean, all business all the time. He might have been doing calculations in his head for all I know. Another way we earn income is through the Flushy Reinvestment Fund. Which is what exactly? Flushy, as an employee benefit, purchases insurance on each employee. In the untimely event of a premature death of an employee, Flushy receives part of the death benefit, and part of the benefit goes to the beneficiary of the employee's choice. Is that legal? I was a bit startled by that proclamation. How could an insurance company buy life insurance on its own employees? Isn't that a massive conflict of interest? Legal. Mike, why wouldn't it be legal? It just seems unusual. Mike, believe it or not, I had the same exact questions you had when I started. Don't worry about it. It's important that we're all on the same page. Know what I mean? Got it. Yeah, I'm still getting used to all of this. It is what it is. Trust me when I say that it's better to get these kinds of questions out of your mind sooner rather than later. We got a lot of young up-and-comer type executives. I swear it's like some of these guys just love to ice skate uphill. You know what I mean? Yeah, for sure. In reality, I had no idea what he was talking about. I was mostly nodding my head like a trained seal begging for fish at the aquarium. From everything I had seen around here, barking like a trained seal might be a core competency. Mike, do you mind if I ask you something? You're kind of in over your head, aren't you? Was I that transparent? Mark, where my shortcomings end, my ambition tends to pick up the slack. That's rather auspicious when it comes to being successful. At least successful here at Flushy. What is auspicious? You being that resourceful is auspicious. People come and go quick around these parts. Don't be another statistic, Mike. I'll try not to. We shared a laugh for a moment. I've been meaning to ask you, Mike, what did you think of that email you stumbled onto earlier in the week? Mark was starting to ask some probing questions. I made sure to be tactful about my answers. I didn't get an easy feeling about him. Sure, he was very lax, but why was he so lax? Which one do you mean? Which one? Which one do you think I'm talking about? The one you were not supposed to see, the one that was meant for me. I didn't think much of it. I'm just a sales guy. Mark started shaking his head and said, Yeah, we do a lot of that around here. We speed people up the org and randomly replace positions with nincompoops. The number one qualification around here seems to be whether or not you're somebody's niece or nephew. Mark trailed off and his tone became rather somber. Mark took a deep breath followed by a slow sigh. There was something bothering him, but I had no idea what it was. Normally people are very candid with me. I guess they figured that if I let my guard down, so should they. Mike, I think we're good for now. Why don't we do a working lunch somewhere off campus? Perfect. How's like 1 p.m.? Mark, why don't you come by my office and we'll go get something to eat? It's my treat today. That'll be great. I'll see you then. I felt like he was holding something back, or maybe he didn't trust me. I was probably just reading too much into the whole situation. We both parted ways and I went back to my office. As I was walking back to my office, I received a text message. It read, Mike, I'm Naomi Watson. I'm the Chief Claims Officer for Flushy. I'll meet you on the 10th floor in about 15 minutes. Meet me outside in the lobby. So I quickly ran up to my office and dropped off my briefcase. I shot on back down to the 10th floor, which was the infamous claims department. I stood around waiting for about 30 minutes for Naomi. I figured she forgot about me, so I shot her a reply-back text. The doors to the claims department quickly opened up, and out walked Naomi Watson. She smiled and greeted me. She stuck out her hand and latched onto mine. We exchanged the normal pleasantries, and she led me back to her office. We passed rows and rows of empty cubicles on the way to her office. Nothing out of the ordinary. It was still kind of early in the morning. This way, Mike. She motioned me over to her office. Her office was a complete disaster zone. It was like a bomb went off or a tornado ripped through her office. I mean, to put it simply, it was a dumpster fire. To be honest, part of me loved it. It reminded me of home. It reminded me of my old brokerage. Simpler times. How's everything going so far? It's going great so far. Great. Welcome to the revolution. The first thing we need to talk about is teamwork. Teamwork is very important around here. In fact, teamwork is the glue that binds us all together. You do want to be part of the team, right, Mike? For sure, of course I do. Mark and I went over that in some detail. Oh yes, Mark. I'm sure he did a splendid job at explaining the importance of teamwork. Naomi approached the oversized liquor cabinet situated in between her desk and the door. She pulled out 2 crystal glasses and what appeared to be a bottle of bourbon. She held both glasses in her left hand and jiggled them my way. Oh, no thank you. It's too early for me. She sighed. Well, your loss. She began to pour herself a shot of bourbon. Well, I suppose it's 5 o'clock somewhere. Naomi slowly poured the bourbon into her glass. As she began to pour, I noticed her shirt sleeve start to reveal an elaborate tattoo on her arm. It's a peacock. What? Apparently, she noticed my prowess for observation. The tattoo on my arm. In case you were wondering, I saw you gawking. Gawking might have been an overstatement. It was more of an observation. We both laughed a bit as she finished pouring her refreshment. Naomi waddled back to her desk. She was one of the only people around here not to be in a hurry to be someplace. A loud thud rang out as she put her glass down on the desk. Naomi left quite the impression on me. She looked more like a runway model rather than an insurance executive. Mike, how much do you know about claims? Not much. I'm just the sales guy. Oh, right. Well, in the claims department, our job is to resolve claims. Sounds simple enough, right? Resolve? You don't miss a thing, do you? 1 out of 20 life insurance death benefit claims go unresolved each year. It accounts for about 5% on average. Over time, over the history of the industry, that 5% has added up to billions upon billions of dollars to insurance companies. Billions? Yes, we're talking about billions of dollars, Mike. I mean, that's legal, right? Mike, don't be silly. It's not like we purposefully withhold the money. Well, not permanently at least. Our job is to resolve claims, and sometimes that means paying them, and sometimes that means denying them, and sometimes that means paying them on a later date. Later date? That sounds complicated. Why don't you tell me more about our claims philosophy? Our claims philosophy? Oh, that's precious. I'd say that our claims philosophy is to automatically deny claims as they come in. We do this in order to make sure the claim is legitimate and not fraudulent. I like to think of it like the justice system. The burden of proof that we need to pay a claim is on the plaintiff, not the defendant. Are you serious? Serious as a heart attack. You don't think we should be paying fraudulent claims out, do you? No, of course not. I was left somewhat speechless. The further I worked my way up the food chain, the more people tended to throw ethics right out the window. I mean, it's like the day they taught ethics in business school, everyone skipped class. The longer we can stretch out the days to resolve a claim, the greater investment returns we can earn for the company. The more investment returns for the company means a higher valuation, and the higher the valuation, the higher your bonus will be at the end of the year. Make sense? Yeah, so to clarify, we're only denying in order to make sure the claim is a real claim. I mean, it's not like we're arbitrarily outright denying claims for no reason, right? Naomi took a sip of her bourbon, which left a fluorescent purple lipstick stain on the rim of the glass. She swirled the glass around in her hand and rubbed her tongue on the rim of the glass. I wasn't quite sure what to think of it. No, Mike, it's certainly not an arbitrary process. There is a method to the madness. I looked to my left and looked to my right. That was one of the best non-answers of all time. I felt the need to ask, what's not arbitrary? Why we deny claims. It's not arbitrary. It's to help push up the valuation of the firm. There is a reason. We don't just run around doing things here. Come on, give us a little bit of credit. Let me get this straight. Are you saying that we deny claims to inflate the value of the company? Sure. All companies do it. All companies deny claims. Come on, Mike, don't be naive. Do you still believe in Santa Claus and unicorns? Uh-huh. How does that work? Ultimately, what it comes down to is how the policy is written. We use a broader definition of the language around the contestability clause. The suicide clause is kind of black and white, isn't it? It's more flexible than you would think. How so? It's standard language, isn't it? Let me clear up some of the confusion for you. Your traditional insurance contract has a 2-year contestability clause. Yeah, I'm familiar with the concept. You can deny a claim within the first 2 years, no matter the reason, even suicide. Precisely. But after 2 years, we cannot contest or deny claims. So what we did was expand the viewfinder a little bit. We blurred the line. Blurred the line? Well, for instance, we added some ways of dying that are excluded from the policy, even during the contestability period, like dying while skydiving, scuba diving, being in a war, flying on an airplane, being inside a building, etc. Things like that. Is that legal? Mike, if it were illegal, do you think we would be doing it? Give us some credit. I mean, we've been able to do quite well before you showed up. We only built up this multi-billion-dollar enterprise. Fair enough. We want to prevent any kind of motivation to use the insurance policy. So we removed things like death due to homicide, death due to illegal activities, death due to drug use, death due to alcohol use, etc. Ah, that makes sense to me. In reality, I had my reservations about all this. I mean, who wouldn't? It's all part of the process. Every insurance company does it. Trust the process, Mike. Are we aligned on this? I put my head down and nodded. Naomi looked at me somewhat concerned. She could tell that I wasn't fully sold on the process. We need you to really lean into the process, Mike. Can you do that? Can you be a team player? No problem. I got it. Did I just sell my soul to the toilet bowl? What did I get myself into? Look, I was in your shoes once. I was new, young, a little too eager, maybe a little brash at times and outspoken. I asked far too many questions above my pay grade. Don't try to eat the whole elephant in one bite. Eat it one bite at a time. I shook my head in agreement. She was right. I was getting a little too excitable. In a nutshell, that is the claims department. What else do you have lined up today? Well, I have a lunch scheduled with Mark, and then I have to cover corporate strategy with David Berrigan later in the day sometime. Classic Mark, always taking lunch breaks. So, that's it. That's claims. I did my part. As far as I'm concerned, you are up to speed. Now get out. We both stood up to presumably shake hands. When I went in, she went in further and hugged me. It was one of those unexpected, awkward business hugs. Why people felt the liberty to hug in a work environment was beyond me. I think she picked up on my uncomfortableness because she let go abruptly. She smiled and I turned for the door. As I was walking away, she yelled, "One last piece of advice, Mike. Don't be a claim." I shook my head and gave her a thumbs up as I walked away. That's a little dark. Don't be a claim? What kind of advice was that? I finally had some time to breathe and to, more importantly, think. I went back to my office. I decided to take the stairs for a change. It took me about 30 minutes or so to climb those stairs. But it was just the mental disconnect I was craving. All the agitation, all the corporate nonsense, all the angst was immediately wiped away from my mind. Every now and then a nice walk was just the mental reset I needed. I walked over to my office, more of a lazy stroll than a walk. Gilroy was out to lunch, so the entire floor was empty. I opened my office door and there was a 7-tier fruit basket on my desk. This thing must have cost hundreds of dollars. There was a gold-encrusted card on the top of the basket. It read, "Welcome to the revolution. Glad to have you on board." Even more impressively, it was signed by each member of the senior leadership team. I plopped myself down in my executive leather chair and stared up at the ceiling. It felt good to stretch out my neck and forget about the day. I slowly looked over at the door, and Mark was standing there, staring at his phone. Lunchtime, kid. Let's go. Sounds good. Where are we going? Does it matter? Let's roll. Not really. Let's get out of here. Mark and I silently walked for like 20 minutes or so off campus to find a spot to eat. It was rather awkward. At certain points during our journey, he mouthed some words without being able to complete full sentences. We finally made it to a hole-in-the-wall restaurant. We stopped, and Mark said, "Here it is, the spot. I hope you like street tacos, Mike." "Mark, it's Southern California. Of course I do." We grabbed a seat at a bench near the restaurant. For the next 20 minutes of my life, I was in heaven. We sat there and ate street tacos on the side of the road. It was pure bliss. Mark took a mouthful of carne asada taco and said, "How do you like it so far?" "These tacos are incredible. Love them." "No, being part of the SLT. Your elevator really doesn't go to the top floor, does it? How do you like working here so far?" Mark had a mouthful of street taco as he began berating me. Mark wiped his lips and started laughing. Mark found imposing his intellect on people to be a leisure activity. "It's so flushy to pick someone to be that dense as part of the SLT. You'll fit right in, kid." "It happens a lot, I take it?" I wasn't offended. I mean, not really. Clearly something had been bothering Mark, and I wanted to figure it out. I was more curious than anything. "Mike, I've got a master's degree in accounting and finance, an MBA from a top business school, and over 25 years' experience. Let me guess. With you, someone walked around the sales floor and just looked for the one person not sleeping or picking their nose. Am I right?" "I mean, well, yeah, that is exactly what happened. How did you know?" I beamed a big old smile while jamming the entire half of a taco into my mouth. We both laughed it out for a few seconds. Mark appreciated my terrible sense of humor. "Sorry to be so pedantic with you, Mike. It's just..." Mark trailed off and went back to eating his taco. Given his attitude, I didn't make much of it. Mark was oblivious to the salsa verde spilling on his pants. I figured it best to just let him monologue and enjoy his meal. "Mike, what do you think of all the things I've been telling you? What do you think of everything?" "The insults?" "No, what you've been learning about the company. The confidential information, the culture, the way we do things. Only if there was enough time..." Mark was starting to trail off, so I took that as a cue to lead the dance and step back into the conversation. "It's all a bit new to me. It's all a bit foreign to me conceptually. I'm a fast study, though. Wait, what do you mean by more time?" "Does anything seem out of place to you? You've been in the industry long enough now. What's your take on everything that we're doing here?" I'm not sure if he ignored my question or didn't hear me, so I decided to not press him on it. "I'm just a sales guy. I don't know if I know enough yet to have an opinion." "Just a sales guy? I don't think so. I think you can actually do some good here. Some good, yeah. I thought that's what I signed up for. See, Mike, the grass isn't always greener on the other side. Sometimes things aren't what they seem." Did we come to eat tacos or philosophize? We both took a moment to finish up our tacos. Nothing like an ice-cold cola and some street tacos. This reminded me of the good old days growing up in SoCal without a care in the world. I wanted to get to the bottom of this. We've spent enough time shooting the breeze. "Mark, I did have a question." "Shoot." "When do I get to meet Todd?" Mark scratched the back of his neck and started staring up at the sun. It was starting to bake. The pavement was cooking in the downtown LA sunlight. He sat there kind of rubbing his hands back and forth, thinking of something to say. "What were we talking about? Oh, Todd, that's right. Todd is on an extended leave of absence. He's with his family in the Caribbean on vacation. Todd began to erratically scope out his surroundings. Vacation? Sounds nice. Yeah, that makes sense. Mark started fidgeting with things in his pockets and pulled out a toothpick. He vigorously began cleaning his teeth. He was fixated on distracting himself. Mark, am I missing something here? To be honest, this all kind of seems too good to be true. I figured it was time to stop dancing around my lamenting concerns. I was never much for browbeating or dancing around topics. I figured that if I wanted to make mistakes, I could sprint into them or slowly and painfully experience them. Mark looked at me, and just as he was about to speak, a panel van pulled up in front of us. We both simultaneously looked up. It was a large black van with tinted windows. It was clearly expensive and looked foreign. We both looked at each other for a second. Mark was slightly less confused than myself. He stood up, and the passenger side door opened up. "It looks like our ride is here?" Mark rose from his seat like someone getting up from a long plane ride. A large private security guy exited the van and opened the sliding door for Mark. As I got up, the security guy gave me a stiff arm and said, "I'm only cleared to let Mark on." Mark looked confused and then looked back at me, like a dog going to the veterinarian. I'll never forget that look. Mike, Just as he was about to say something, the security guy shut the van door. The van sped off and left me with a dizzying stream of curiosity. So I started walking back to the office. I started finding my way back to the office and decided to stop and take in the view. Life was short. Why not enjoy it a little bit? I wasn't even really sure what my job was yet, or at least what I had to do. I guess all I had to be concerned with was surviving the corporate routine. What in the world could be so important to whisk someone off like that? This day was getting stranger and stranger by the minute. About 15 minutes or so into my trek back to Flushy HQ, I got a series of text messages. I didn't bother to read them. I was really just trying to clear my head and enjoy the views. A lot of people give downtown Los Angeles a bad rap, but it's actually quite nice in the springtime. As I strolled down the main drag, I think it was Flower Street, I could see the office in the distance. People were rushing into the building, swarming like a bunch of worker bees returning to the hive. What's that about? I guess I was about to find out. As I entered the building, the lobby was dead quiet and empty. I mean the kind of empty you would see in an aisle after a blue light special. I found my way to my private elevator and headed back up to my office. As I headed up, the elevator stopped on the 4th floor and a suit stepped into the elevator. "Great! I get my own private security detail. What happened now? Did I get promoted again?" "Mike, I've been advised to tell you that your presence is required up on the 40th floor. Your attendance is required for an emergency SLT meeting." "Do I have a choice?" The suit turned to me and slowly shook his head at me. Obviously, this was important. I wasn't sure how people expected me to get any work done with all these pointless meetings. I took it that was just how corporate America was, a lot of busy work. "Lead the way. Can I ask what this is about?" The suit turned to me and slowly shook his head at me in disapproval. We arrived at the 20th floor, and a couple more people hopped on the elevator with us. Some familiar faces from before. We were crammed together like a can of sardines, otherwise I would have started striking up some good, awkward elevator conversation. We finally arrived at the 40th floor. The group was scurried off to the conference room. The conference room was rather light today, which made me question just how important this impromptu meeting was. The suit started handing out phone book-sized NDAs and pointed out each signature line. Just as he started handing them out to the attendees, David Berrigan entered the room. He entered the room like a conquering king back from a protracted war, magnanimous as always.
Thanks for meeting on such short notice. Please sit down." The room went silent for a moment as David approached his chair. Whether he was going to sit or not was another question altogether. "Well, there is no easy way to say this. We are meeting today because of some somber news. It's with mixed emotions I'm sorry to say that on his way back to the office, Mark was involved in a fatal car accident." "What?" I accidentally blurted out. "I was just eating tacos with him 30 minutes ago. What in the world happened?" "Mike, don't you read your text messages?" There was no good answer to that question, so I just decided to keep my mouth shut. The suit came around and started collecting our signed NDAs. He was shoveling them into a briefcase. "Like I said, before Mike interrupted me, Mark was involved in a fatal car accident on his way back to the office. He will be missed." Naomi chimed in and said, "I think in times of great uncertainty, we should all try to mellow out and be positive. We should relax, meditate, and do some yoga. This is a time for reflection and introspection." Yoga? What kind of nonsense is that? A man just died. His body wasn't even cold yet, and people are talking about yoga. Now, no point in us crying over spilt milk. We have a business to run. We have a revolution to lead. Like any revolution, there are necessary sacrifices that must be made. I surveyed the room. I was glancing around to try and read facial cues. Everyone was just nodding in agreement. This was the entirety of the senior leadership team, and people were barely fazed by the news. I mean, his body isn't even cold yet, and we're acting like everything is just business as usual. During this transition period, until we find a replacement for Mark, we need to take drastic steps in order to thrive together. We need to lock arms and lean in. The group of executives nodded in agreement. David snapped his fingers over at his secretary, and she brought him a glass of water. David clasped onto the glass and held it close to his lips without drinking. "Let's get down to nuts and bolts. We have a unique window of opportunity. In fact, I'm stepping up to lead through the fog. In fact, we all need to step up in our own ways. I'll be enveloping Mark's role and responsibilities into my day-to-day." David began drinking the water, and some of the executives started gauging the room and looking around at each other. Not a single member of the senior leadership team raised an objection. David finished drinking and said, "Just to make sure everything goes smoothly for our next round of funding. Are we aligned on this?" Everyone in the room nodded and murmured support for his initiative. David wasn't pleased and repeated his request. "Are we aligned on this, people?" "Yes," a member of the SLT said. "Yes," a member of the SLT said. One by one, each person in the room verbally acquiesced. David smirked and continued his dialogue. "Okay, now we have that all settled. Let's talk strategy. Let's talk big picture." David snapped his fingers again, like someone snootily ordering a waiter in an upscale restaurant. His secretary jolted into action and brought over another glass of lime-infused water. "We've got a game-changer of a strategy coming down the pipeline. We need to execute a best-in-class action plan. The strategy has a lot of moving parts, which is why we need alignment on all the deliverables." David began to drink his water, which I saw as an opportune time to invite myself back into the conversation. I sheepishly raised my hand to get David's attention. He looked at me with this bizarre expression. "Mike, you don't have to raise your hand. This isn't kindergarten. What's on your mind?" "How do we do all that?" "Ah, you're a big picture guy, eh? Well, I'm glad you asked, new guy. You can do one of 4 things to get ahead in this industry. You can be smarter, you can be first, you can cheat, or you can out-hustle. Since I don't feel like cheating, let's figure something out." The senior leadership team started to look around the room, one by one, each nodding at one another in agreement.
It was pretty clear to me that not one of them had the faintest clue as to what David was talking about. His speeches were more like authoritarian dictator-style diatribes. Somehow they always ended up being a melange of business jargon and/or meaningless platitudes. Growing up, as a kid, you always think that adults have their stuff together. In reality, when you grow up, you realize just how wrong you were about that. When looking from the outside in at a corporation, I always thought the same thing about CEOs. I always thought they had their stuff together. Now I realize just how wrong I was about that. I mean, it turns out they're just as clueless as the rest of us. We sat there for a couple of minutes and David Berrigan turned on one of the projectors. We went through a corporate legally approved presentation. The presentation took about an hour or so. In reality, it felt more like days. The presentation led us through the roadmap to the IPO. We had super aggressive growth goals for the year. I wasn't quite sure how we planned on achieving them. David Berrigan talked about the evolution of the industry, where we fit into the puzzle, and then he finally arrived at the newest part of the strategy. And that is why today I am unveiling the newest Flushy strategic initiative. For too long, we've been trying to move too many footballs 1 yard at a time. Today, we are focused on moving one football 100 yards, not 100 footballs 1 yard each. Our plan is to aggressively start recruiting independent insurance agencies. This is a key part of our omni-channel strategy. Time to go deep and go home. Independent insurance agents? Now you're talking my language. So how do we plan on doing that? David Berrigan looked right at me and said, "I'm glad you asked. That, my friend, is precisely where you fit into the picture." David took a second to lazily take a sip of his vitamin and lime-infused water. My eagerness prompted me to propel the conversation forward. What exactly is our recruitment strategy? I sat on pins and needles waiting to hear some magical explanation. You, Mike Allen, you are the recruitment strategy. I'm the recruitment strategy? Correct. We can touch base offline about the details. Of course I am. I shook my head in agreement. My leg was starting to fall asleep, so I shifted in my chair. It must have seemed like uncomfortable fidgeting to everyone in the room. David snapped his fingers again, and his secretary leaped into action, refilling his glass. You see, Mike, we didn't pluck you off the street merely for charitable purposes. We saw raw, untapped potential. You know how to speak to these people. Insurance agents have a certain way about them. They have a certain language and a way of dealing with people. Frankly, some just have brain damage from working with bad insurance companies. Brain damage? What a preposterous thing to say about an entire profession. Obviously, this was hyperbole and not meant to be taken literally. But still, who does that? David, that sounds good on paper. Getting them onboarded is one thing. How do you plan on retaining them? I'd imagine we have a well-thought-out retention strategy, right? We do. You are the retention strategy, Mike. Mm-hmm. I see. Mike, we can align on the deliverables offline. We need to make sure that we are all singing from the same hymn sheet. In reality, I hadn't the furthest clue what that was supposed to mean. How am I the retention strategy? This is a multi-billion-dollar insurance company. How am I the retention strategy? What does that even mean? Well, people, it's like I always say, tough times never last, but tough people do. Let's go change the world. I'll email out your prospective initiatives and deliverables throughout the day. I wasn't very sure what the strategy was or what our plan was. I was pretty sure he stole that quote from some airport hotel motivational speech. David called an end to the meeting. We quickly adjourned the meeting and the room cleared out. I sat back in my chair for a few minutes to think. The automatic room lights had turned off, so I was sitting there alone in the dark. The conference room was dead quiet. I mean, I could hear a pin drop. It was that quiet.
It was the perfect environment to space out and take it all in.